What would you do if an alien accidentally stumbled into your deepest memories and discovered a secret you'd kept hidden for years? Marcus Chen had exactly 3 seconds to contemplate that question before the world as he knew it shattered completely. It started with a migraine, the kind that splits your skull in half and makes you see stars behind your eyelids. Except these weren't ordinary stars, they were silver and pulsing with an intelligence that felt distinctly foreign, distinctly aware. He grabbed the edge of his console on the observation deck of Lunar Station Epsilon, his knuckles going white as the pain intensified, and then suddenly, impossibly, he felt her. Not saw her, not heard her, felt her, like a presence brushing against the very fabric of his consciousness, with the delicacy of someone who had no idea they'd just opened a door that was never meant to be opened. On the other side of the galaxy, aboard the diplomatic vessel Serenthia, a young Velari woman named Kaelith collapsed against the wall of her quarters, her silver hair spilling across her shoulders like liquid starlight as her telepathic implant malfunctioned in the most catastrophic way possible. The Velari were known for many things throughout the galactic community: their towering 8-foot frames that made humans look like children beside them, their legendary lifespans that stretched into centuries, their fierce warrior culture that had carved an empire across 1,000 worlds, but most of all, they were known for their telepathic sensitivity, a gift that allowed them to communicate across vast distances, to share memories and emotions with a precision that made human language seem primitive by comparison. Kaelith had trained for decades to master this ability, had spent countless hours learning to shield her mind and respect the boundaries of others, which made it all the more horrifying when she suddenly found herself tumbling through a neural pathway she had never authorized, falling into a mind that was completely, utterly, impossibly human. "No, no, no," she whispered, but her voice seemed to come from somewhere far away, muffled by the weight of memories that weren't her own, pressing in from all sides. She could feel his confusion, his pain, his desperate attempt to understand what was happening to him, and beneath all of that, buried so deep that it took her breath away, she felt something else: recognition. This human knew her, not in the casual way that species often encountered each other through news feeds and diplomatic channels, but in the intimate way that comes from years of watching, years of protecting, years of sacrifice that she had never known existed. The first memory hit her like a physical blow, and suddenly she was no longer on her ship. She was on a frozen moon called Vithrix 9, crouching behind a cargo container with a pulse rifle in her hands and her heart pounding against her ribs. Through Marcus's eyes, she watched herself step off a diplomatic shuttle 3 years ago, her silver hair catching the pale light of the dying sun as she walked with the confident stride of someone who had no idea an assassin was positioning himself on the rooftop above her. She saw Marcus raise his rifle, saw his finger squeeze the trigger a fraction of a second before the assassin could take his shot, saw the hooded figure crumple and fall without making a sound. And then, before anyone could notice, before she could even turn her head, she watched Marcus melt back into the shadows like he had never been there at all. "Who are you?" Kaelith breathed, but the memories were already shifting, pulling her deeper into the labyrinth of Marcus Chen's extraordinary life. She saw a cramped apartment on Earth, rain streaking down grimy windows as a 12-year-old boy sat cross-legged on a threadbare carpet, his eyes fixed on a flickering holoscreen that displayed footage from the first Velari human contact. She felt his wonder, pure and overwhelming, as he watched her people descend from the stars for the very first time, and she heard his mother's tired voice drifting from the kitchen. "They're beautiful, aren't they? Like angels. They're warriors." The boy had replied, his voice carrying a certainty that seemed too profound for his years. "They're going to need protecting. Everyone needs protecting, even angels." His mother had laughed, the sound thin and exhausted, and Marcus had said nothing more. But Kaelith felt the promise taking root in his young heart, felt the seeds of dedication being planted in soil that had known too much hardship and not enough love. The memory dissolved, and she found herself in a military training facility, watching Marcus push his body beyond its limits as drill instructors screamed in his face and fellow recruits dropped out one by one. She felt his muscles burn, felt his lungs scream for oxygen, felt the single-minded determination that kept him moving when everyone else had given up. He wasn't doing this for glory or recognition. He was doing this because somewhere in the galaxy, there was a girl made of silver and starlight, and he was going to be ready when she needed him. The thought should have terrified Kaelith, should have felt obsessive and dangerous, But as she sank deeper into his memories, she understood that it wasn't obsession at all. It was duty. It was honor. It was the purest form of love she had ever encountered, not romantic, not possessive, but something older and more profound, the ancient dedication of a guardian to the one they were sworn to protect. She saw herself through his eyes a dozen times over the years, each glimpse brief and distant, but filled with a warmth that made her chest ache. She saw herself laughing at a diplomatic reception, and through Marcus's memory, she felt his relief that she was happy and safe. She saw herself giving a speech about interspecies cooperation, and she felt his pride, fierce and protective, as though her success was the greatest victory he had ever achieved. She saw herself walking through a marketplace on Telenus Prime, completely unaware that 3 streets away, Marcus was quietly dismantling a trafficking ring that had been planning to kidnap her for ransom. "I never knew," she whispered, and the words seemed to echo through the strange space between their minds. "You were never supposed to know," Marcus replied, and suddenly he was there beside her, not physically, but mentally, his presence warm and solid and infinitely kind. He looked different than she had expected, smaller than she was used to of course, with dark hair and tired eyes and a face that carried the weight of too many secrets, but there was something about him that made her feel safe in a way she had never experienced before. "Your implant malfunctioned," he explained, his voice gentle despite the obvious strain of having someone else inside his mind. "I can feel you trying to pull away, but the connection is stuck. We need to ride it out until your ship's medics can reset the system." Kaelith should have been embarrassed, should have been apologizing profusely for the violation of his privacy, but she couldn't seem to stop the tears that were sliding down her mental projection's cheeks. "You saved my life," she said, "multiple times. You've been watching over me for years, and I never even knew your name. Why? Why would you do this for someone you've never met?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and she felt the conflict in him, the part of him that wanted to deflect and make light of his sacrifices. But there was nowhere to hide in a space like this, no walls to put up when 2 minds were so intimately connected. And finally, he sighed. "Do you remember the Serenthia Accords?" Kaelith nodded slowly. "The peace treaty that ended the border disputes between our people. I was just a child when they were signed. You were 7 years old," Marcus said, and there was something in his voice that made her breath catch. "And you were dying." The memory slammed into her without warning, and suddenly she was tiny. Again, small enough that an adult Velari could carry her in one arm, and she was burning with fever in a medical bay that smelled of antiseptic and fear. She saw her father, the great Admiral Velrith, pacing beside her bed, with his hands clasped behind his back, his face carved from stone, even as his eyes betrayed the terror he refused to show. "There's a treatment," a human doctor was saying, his voice thick with exhaustion. "An experimental procedure using human neural tissue. It could save her, but the donor wouldn't survive the extraction. Find someone willing," her father commanded. "Pay whatever it takes." "Sir, we have a volunteer. He's a young soldier, barely 20 years old." He says, "Then why are we still talking?" "Proceed immediately." The doctor hesitated. "Because he has one condition. He wants to be allowed to watch over your daughter afterward. From a distance, never making contact, but always there if she needs protection. He says if you agree, he'll give his life gladly." Kaelith felt her soul crack open as she watched her father make the bargain that had shaped her entire existence, watched him agree without hesitation to a promise he never intended to keep. And then she saw the young soldier being led into a surgical bay, saw his face for the first time, saw the peace in his eyes as he prepared to die so that a little alien girl he had never met could live. Except he hadn't died, by some miracle of medicine or luck or sheer, stubborn human will, Marcus Chen had survived the procedure that should have killed him. He had woken in a recovery ward with half his neural tissue missing and the other half slowly regenerating in ways the doctors couldn't explain. And the first thing he had done, the very first thing, was ask if the Velari child was going to be okay. "My father broke his promise," Kaelith breathed. "He never told me. He let me grow up thinking I'd survive by chance, never knowing that a human had almost died for me, never knowing that your father kept his end of the bargain," Marcus interrupted gently. "He gave me clearance to work in Velari space, access to security channels, the resources I needed to do my job. He just never told you about it because he knew you would feel guilty. He was trying to protect you from that burden. By hiding the truth, by denying me the chance to thank you, to honor your sacrifice." The greatest guardian is the one who is never needed, Marcus said, and there was a wisdom in his voice that seemed far too old for his years. I didn't save you so that you would owe me a debt. I saved you because you deserve to live. Because the universe is brighter with you in it. Because he stopped. And Kaelith felt the words he wasn't saying. The truth that lurked beneath all his careful deflections. Because you loved me, she finished for him, and the statement hung between them like a star waiting to be born. Not in the way you're thinking, Marcus said quickly. I don't expect anything from you. I never wanted you to know I existed. I just wanted you to be safe, to be happy, to live the life you were meant to live. Without knowing that someone in this vast, cold universe considered me worth dying for. Kaelith stepped closer to him in the strange space between their minds, and even though neither of them had a physical body in this place, she reached out and took his hand. The contact sent ripples through both of them, waves of emotion and memory, and something that felt like coming home after a long journey. Marcus Chen, you are the most selfless, infuriating, beautiful soul I have ever encountered. Do you honestly believe I would be angry that you saved my life? That I would feel burdened by the knowledge that someone out there cared whether I lived or died? Most Velari consider humans to be. I am not most Velari. I am Kaelith Velrith, daughter of warriors and diplomats, and I make my own decisions about what is precious and what is not. And you, Marcus Chen, are precious beyond measure. She felt his surprise, felt the walls around his heart tremble and begin to crack. Felt the lonely boy who had made a promise in a cramped apartment on a rainy night finally beginning to believe that someone could see him, truly see him, and still think he was worth something. The connection is stabilizing, he said softly, and Kaelith could feel it too, the gentle tug of reality pulling them back toward their separate bodies. Your medics must have fixed the implant. In a few minutes you'll be able to withdraw safely. And then what? Kaelith demanded. You disappear back into the shadows? You go back to watching over me from a distance, never speaking to me, never letting me return even a fraction of what you've given. That's how it's supposed to work. That's the bargain I made. Then make a new bargain. With me this time. Marcus looked at her with those tired eyes that had seen too much and expected too little. And Kaelith felt the fragile hope blooming in his chest like the first flowers of spring after a brutal winter. What kind of bargain? Stay with me, she said simply. Not as a shadow. Not as a distant protector, but as a friend. As someone I can talk to, argue with, share meals with, laugh with. Let me know, the man who saved my life, not just the legend of him. Let me protect you for a change, because you, Marcus Chen, look like you haven't had a proper night's sleep in years. The laugh that escaped him was rough and startled, like he had forgotten how to make the sound. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am. Then we'll figure it out together. Isn't that what humans do? Adapt and overcome? The words were fading now, the connection growing thin as their minds began to separate, and Kaelith felt a desperate urgency flooding through her. She couldn't lose him now, not when she had just found him, not when the universe had finally showed her the invisible thread that had connected them across light years and impossible odds. The Serenthia will be docking at Lunar Station Epsilon for repairs in 3 days, she said quickly. Meet me there. Bay 17, at sunset. Promise me, Marcus. Promise me you'll be there. She felt his hesitation, felt the part of him that still believed he didn't deserve to step out of the shadows. And she squeezed his hand harder, even as their forms began to shimmer and dissolve. Promise me. I promise, he whispered, and then she was gone, snapping back into her own body with a gasp that brought a worried medic rushing to her side. The next 3 days were the longest of Kaelith's life. She paced her quarters, reviewed her schedule 100 times, changed her outfit 3 times before settling on simple tactical pants and a silver-trimmed jacket that matched her hair. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that she was acting like a schoolgirl with her first crush, but every time she tried to calm down, she remembered the feeling of Marcus's mind against hers, the bone-deep goodness of him, the loneliness that he had carried for so long without complaint, and her heart ached all over again. When the Serenthia finally docked at Lunar Station Epsilon, Kaelith was the first one through the airlock, her long legs carrying her through the corridors at a pace that made her security escort jog to keep up. Bay 17 was on the far side of the station, a small observation deck that overlooked Earth, hanging in the void like a blue marble against velvet darkness. The sunset her people measured time by was visible through the massive windows. Earth's atmosphere, catching the light of its star and painting the darkness in shades of gold and rose. And there, silhouetted against the dying light, stood a human man with dark hair and tired eyes, who looked up as she entered, and smiled like she was the answer to every prayer he had never allowed himself to speak. Kaelith didn't slow down. She crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, her 8-foot frame towering over his merely human proportions, and she dropped to her knees so that their eyes were finally level. "You came," she breathed. "I promised," he replied simply. And then, before either of them could overthink it, Kaelith reached out and cupped his face in her hands, marveling at how fragile he seemed and how fiercely strong she knew he was. She felt the rasp of stubble against her palms, felt the warmth of his skin, felt the way his breath caught when she leaned her forehead against his. "You spent 15 years protecting me," she said softly. "Now it's my turn. Let me be your guardian, Marcus Chen. Let me be your friend. Let me show you what it feels like to be loved without condition. The way you have loved me all this time." Marcus's hands came up to cover hers, trembling slightly, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotions he had kept buried for far too long. "I don't know how to let someone protect me. Then we'll learn together," Kaelith promised. And the smile that spread across her face was brighter than any sunset, brighter than any star, bright enough to illuminate all the dark corners of his lonely heart. Behind them, Earth turned slowly in the void, and somewhere in the vast expanse of the galaxy, a bond that had been forged in sacrifice was finally being recognized in love. It wasn't romantic yet, that would come later, growing slowly and surely like a star being born, but it was real, and it was precious, and it was the beginning of something that would change them both forever. Marcus Chen had spent 15 years being a shadow, and Kaelith Velrith had spent her entire life never knowing she was protected. Now, standing together in the fading light of an alien sunset, they finally had the chance to discover who they could become when they stopped hiding and started living. And if the universe had any sense of poetry, which, as it turned out, it very much did, their story was only just beginning.